and women. Now, the culmination of the neoconservatives' political philosophy is their call for national greatness conservatism. Following Crystal and Strauss, David Brooks, William Crystal, and a new generation of neocons proclaimed the nation as the fundamental unit of political reality, nationalism as the rallying cry for a new public morality, and the national interest as the moral standard of political decision-making. Morally, the purpose of national greatness conservatism is, according to David Brooks, to energize the American spirit, to fire the imagination with something majestic, to advance a unifying American creed, and to inspire Americans to look beyond their narrow self-interest to some larger national mission, to some mystically Hegelian national destiny. The new American citizen must be animated by nationalist virtues such as duty, loyalty, and self-sacrifice. The neocons' basic moral principle is clear and simple: the subordination and sacrifice of the individual to the nation-state. Politically, Brooks's new nationalism would use the federal government to pursue great nationalistic public projects and to build grand monuments in order to unify the nation spiritually and to prevent America's slide into what he calls nihilistic mediocrity. It is important that the American people, he thinks, conform, swear allegiance to, and obey some grand central purpose defined for them by the federal government. The ideal American man, he argues, should negate and forego his individual values and interests and merge his self into some mystical union with the collective soul. This is precisely why Brooks, in an op-ed in the New York Times last year, praised the virtues of Chinese collectivism over those of American-style individualism. In the end, the neocons want to remoralize America by creating a new, patriotic civil religion around the idea of Americanism, an Americanism that will essentially redefine the American grain. The neoconservative vision of a good America is one in which ordinary people work hard, read the Bible, go to church, recite the Pledge of Allegiance, practice homespun virtue, sacrifice themselves for the common good, obey the commands of government, fight wars, and ultimately die for the state. The neocons' national greatness philosophy is also the animating force behind their foreign policy. Indeed, neoconservative foreign policy is a branch of its domestic policy. The grand purpose of national greatness foreign policy is to inspire the American people to transcend their vulgar, infantilized, and selfish interests for uplifting national projects. The neoconservatives' policy of benevolent hegemony will, according to William Crystal and Robert Kagan, quote, relish the opportunity for national engagement, embrace the possibility of national greatness, and restore a sense of the heroic, close quote. In other words, America should wage war in order to combat creeping nihilism. In the revealing words of Crystal and Kagan, quote, the remoralization of America at home ultimately requires the remoralization of American foreign policy, close quote. Going to war, sacrificing both treasure and blood in order to bring democracy to strangers, this, in their view, is the mission worthy of a great nation. The neocons therefore believe that a muscular foreign policy, one that includes military intervention abroad, war, regime change, and imperial governance, will keep the American people politicized and therefore virtuous. By saving the world from tyranny, America will save herself from her own internal corruption. And there's more. By keeping America perpetually involved in nation building around the world, neoconservative rulers will have the opportunity to exercise their statesmanlike virtues. There can be no statesmanship without politics, and there can be no truly magnanimous statesmanship without war. So the neocons fear and loathe moral principles that might deny them that outlet. A condition of semi-permanent war, a policy of benevolent hegemony, and the creation of a republican empire means that there will always be a need for politics and statesmanship. Neoconservatism, in my view, as I've tried to demonstrate, is a systematic political philosophy. All the neocons talk about moderation, all of their talk about moderation and prudence is really only meant to disarm intellectually their competitors in the conservative libertarian movement who want to defend the founders' principles of individual rights and limited government. The neocons preach moderation as a virtue so that ordinary people will accept compromise as inevitable. But a political philosophy that advocates moderation and prudence as its defining principles is either dishonestly hiding its true principles or it represents a transition stage on the way to some more authoritarian regime or both. So, to what then does it all add up? My deepest fear is that the neoconservatives are preparing this nation philosophically for a soft, American-style fascism, a fascism purged of its ugliest features and gussied up for an American audience. Now, this is obviously a very serious charge and not one that I take lightly. The neocons, and I want to make this very clear, the neocons are not fascists, but I do argue that they share some common features with fascism. Consider the evidence, which I lay out in several hundred pages in the book. First, like the fascists, Strauss and the neoconservatives reject the values and principles associated with Enlightenment liberalism, namely reason, egoism, individual rights, material acquisition, limited government, freedom, and capitalism. They are repulsed by the moral ethos associated with liberal capitalism, and they praise the nobility of what they call the barbarian virtues such as discipline, courage, daring, endurance, loyalty, renunciation, obedience, and sacrifice. For evidence, read Leo Strauss's 1941 lecture on German nihilism. 2. Like the fascists, Straussianized neocons are metaphysical collectivists. They take the nation as the primary unit of political value. They view the body politic as an organic whole. They promote social duties over individual rights. They support using the coercive power of the state to promote order and unity. They demand that individuals subordinate themselves to the public interest and serve some fuzzy notion of national greatness. 3. Like the fascists, Strauss and the neocons are statists who strongly oppose a depoliticized, that is, a night watchman view of government in favor of a paternalistic, corporatist, omnipotent state. They advocate using the coercive power of the state to regulate man's economic life and his spiritual life. And like the fascists, Straussianized neocons downplay the importance of constitutional rules and boundaries, and they glamorize, in particular, the virtues of great statesmen. Like the fascists, finally, Strauss and the neocons believe that life is or should be defined by conflict, and that a state of ongoing peace and prosperity is morally degrading. They advocate keeping the American people in an agitated state of permanent fear and loathing against internal and external threats. They want to militarize American culture, they romanticize the virtues of war and empire as regenerative, and they support a foreign policy of perpetual war in order to restore America's national destiny and sense of greatness. In conclusion, I worry then that the neocons are paving the road for a kind of soft despotism that might even lead one day to a type of fascism. They make us feel comfortable with certain fascist principles by Americanizing them, by draping them in traditional American manners and mores and in the rhetoric of Abraham Lincoln. The neoconservatives are the advocates, I think, of a new managerial state, a state controlled and regulated by a mandarin class of conservative virtuecrats who think the American people are incapable of governing themselves without the help of the neocons' special a priori wisdom. They are the conservative version, in other words, of FDR's brain trust. They want to regulate virtually all areas of human life, all areas of human thought and action. They support government control of the economy as well as government control and regulation of people's private lives. The neocons, in other words, want to regulate the bedroom as much as they want to regulate the boardroom. The neoconservatives, finally, are the false prophets of Americanism. And those who wish to defend America's Enlightenment values and the individual rights republic created by its revolutionary founders must therefore recapture from the neocons the intellectual and moral high ground that once defined the promise of American life. Thank you.